Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the mind-boggling true story of the man who defied Friday the 13th, the insane life and voyages of Sir Francis Chichester. We're going to explore the life of an adventurer whose autobiography literally reads like a summer blockbuster movie script. We're talking about a guy who went from shoveling coal in the pitch-black belly of a steamship to navigating the open skies and the lonely seas. His story is an absolute masterclass in human resilience, so let's dive right in.
So, let me ask you a question. Would you ever launch your most dangerous mission on Friday the 13th? For most of us, the answer is a hard no, right? But Francis Chichester wasn't most people. While sailors and pilots all over the world absolutely dreaded this superstitious date and avoided it at all costs, Chichester arrogantly treated it as his own personal badge of honor. He actually considered it good luck. He intentionally scheduled his most daring, high-stakes launches right on Friday the 13th, almost like he was just taunting the universe.
Well, sometimes the universe hits back. In August 1931, his luck completely ran out in Katsura, Japan. He was attempting a super difficult takeoff when his float plane snagged these hidden overhead power and telegraph cables. The biplane whipped violently out of the sky and crashed to the earth in just a horrific tangle of shattered metal and wood. This was a terrifying, body-shattering collision that grounded his dreams of global flight and forced him into an agonizingly long recovery. But to really understand how he survived this and how he eventually conquered the world, we've got to rewind the clock and start from the very beginning of his incredible autobiography.
His life arc is just massive in scale. We're tracking an epic journey that goes from a penniless teenager traveling in steerage down to New Zealand in 1919 to becoming a literal aviation pioneer in 1929, and finally transforming into a legendary solo ocean sailor by 1966. It's an incredible progression. He essentially lived 3 distinct, jam-packed lives all rolled into one lifetime.
All right, let's start with that first era, his descent into the underworld.
Picture this. It's 1919. An 18-year-old Francis leaves a strict, unhappy childhood behind in England and boards a steamship bound for New Zealand as a third-class passenger. But he was quickly driven totally mad by the sheer boredom of the passenger deck. So, seeking an extreme escape, what does he do? He volunteers to descend into the literal bowels of the ship to become a coal stoker. Imagine testing your raw stamina by shoveling heavy coal into roaring red-hot furnaces, working alongside a hardened crew in the suffocating pitch-black heat of an ocean liner's boiler room, all just to avoid being bored. That is exactly the kind of extreme, high-pressure environment where his character was forged. And when he arrived in New Zealand with basically nothing, he didn't look for some comfortable, easy office job. Instead, he threw himself into this brutal progression of manual labor. Step 1, he's a coal stoker. Step 2, a lumberjack. Step 3, a gold prospector. And finally, Step 4, a wealthy land developer. The big takeaway here is that his willingness to just endure grueling physical conditions paid off massively. He transitioned those raw survival skills into sharp business acumen, ultimately forging a huge fortune in land development and forestry right before the Great Depression hit. But wealth alone wasn't going to satisfy his restless spirit. Fast forward to 1929, bringing us to the wings of an Iron Man.
Chichester returned to England with a brand new obsession. He wanted to fly. So he learned to pilot at Brooklands, bought a small open-cockpit de Havilland Gipsy Moth biplane, and took to the skies. But he didn't just learn to fly. He totally revolutionized how navigation was done. This is where his genius really shines. By adapting his land surveying skills from New Zealand, he essentially invented a way to use a maritime sextant for celestial navigation, meaning he was plotting his course by the stars, all while simultaneously solo piloting a fragile aircraft in a turbulent, freezing, open cockpit.
And this incredible innovation in celestial navigation allowed him to achieve the seemingly impossible in 1931. Against all odds, he completed the first ever solo east-to-west flight across the treacherous Tasman Sea, flying from New Zealand to Australia in his float plane, which he named Elijah. It was a monumental achievement for sure, but the elements were fiercely fighting him at every single turn. 9 weeks. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering amount of time he spent grounded on Lord Howe Island during this journey. A massive storm had completely flipped his plane upside down. Most people would have just quit right there, called for a rescue boat, and gone home. Not Chichester. He spent 9 grueling weeks working alongside the island locals to completely rebuild his plane from scratch before finally taking off again.
Once he was back in the air,
His route led him to one of the most fascinating detours of his life, which we'll call high society in the tropics.
Later that same year, his audacious attempt to fly solo around the world via the Western Pacific brought him directly into the warm, tropical waters of the Philippines. As he details in his autobiography, the contrast he experienced here was totally mesmerizing. One moment, he's surviving in freezing, turbulent, open cockpit isolation, fighting ocean winds completely alone. The very next moment, he's immersed in the intense, humid heat of aristocratic high society dances in Manila and Iloilo. He was treated like a dashing international celebrity, dancing with young Filipinas in elegant, traditional Maria Clara dresses. For a guy surviving on the razor's edge in the sky, suddenly having to navigate the beautifully strict, highly formal, chaperone-guarded etiquette of Filipino high society was an adventure all its own and a real highlight of his grueling journey.
But this brief moment of tropical luxury was soon followed by his ultimate test. Let's return to his habit of defying Friday the 13th. Like we mentioned at the start of our explainer, Chichester treated his adventures with an arrogant defiance of bad luck, intentionally scheduling dangerous flights on Friday the 13th. And that brings us right back to our opening hook, that fateful August day in Katsura, Japan. Hitting those hidden power lines shattered his biplane and his body. The severe injuries required an agonizingly long recovery, and honestly, it truly seemed to mark the definitive end of his global record-setting adventures.
But the story doesn't end in that hospital bed. Decades passed, bringing us to his return to the lonely sea. When advanced age and a severe battle with lung cancer threatened to end his story for good, he flat out refused to give up. Instead of retiring to a quiet, comfortable life, he pivoted completely. He swapped the skies for the rough, unforgiving waters of the ocean. He simply changed his element. In 1960, he entered the very first single-handed transatlantic race. Sailing completely alone aboard his yacht, Gipsy Moth IV, he crossed the brutal Atlantic Ocean from Plymouth, England, all the way to New York City. And he didn't just survive it, he actually won the race, absolutely shocking the world and proving that his incredible grit was totally immune to age or illness.
But you know what? He was just getting warmed up for his crowning achievement. In 1966, at 65 years old, he set out aboard Gipsy Moth IV to sail solo around the globe. Following the historic, incredibly dangerous Clipper routes, he spent 9 months totally alone. He battled terrifying, mountain-sized waves. He endured severe hallucination-inducing sleep deprivation. He even overcame critical mechanical failures while thousands of miles from any kind of help. And he conquered these terrifying obstacles one by one.
When he finally returned to Plymouth, completing his circumnavigation, the world basically stood still to honor him. He was greeted by 250,000 screaming fans. The penniless coal stoker, turned aviation pioneer, turned master sailor, was officially immortalized by royalty. Queen Elizabeth II knighted him using the very same sword that King Francis Drake had used centuries before.
So imagine you're 65 years old. Do you retire, or do you sail alone across the globe? Sir Francis Chichester's incredible autobiography proves that whether you're facing a pitch-black boiler room, a shattered biplane in Japan, or the lonely sea, you can always make your own luck. You don't have to accept the limits society places on you. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to ask yourself, what boundaries are you currently accepting as fixed, and what limits are you ready to defy?